Maybe we can just comment one thing that I mentioned previously, which is the fact that whenever you say you have a business model, you need to prove that it's extraordinary, material and stuff. But very often the B impact assessment questionnaire will ask you what share of your turnover actually comes from that business model, because it needs to be something that's really material for the business, not a side or a communication subsidiary, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's actually also a really special approach that we have to the assessment. And again, I think that goes back to this idea of ultimately what we're trying to do is get a 360-degree view of a company and make sure that we are managing the risks of what might be overclaiming and potential greenwashing. And so you can probably envision in your head examples of companies who have commercials where they talk about, I'll share this as a hypothetical, but there probably are quite real companies who are doing this. A fossil fuel company who has a commercial about how they're investing in renewable energy. And that commercial and that marketing and what they're sharing publicly is so focused on, we are creating green solutions. It's great that they're working on green solutions. If you were to then boil down that company's business model and ask them what percentage of your actual investment, your revenues, however you want to frame it, is going into whatever it is that they're really talking about publicly in that commercial, there's a decent chance it's going to be very small. And so what we do in our assessment is we do always sort of calibrate a company's performance by the relative magnitude and scale of the business. And so if you're generating revenue from 1% of your business for renewable energies, you're going to get 1% credit for renewable energy. And so that's a really powerful way to, again, when thinking about sort of quality rather than quantity, maybe the goal should not be to think about how many different business models can I have, but how can I lean further and further into the potential that I have for a business model. That fossil fuel company can invest more and more into renewable energy and ultimately transition it so they go from 1% to 30% to ultimately 100%, and then would be getting full credit for that business model.
Yeah, I think that's a key differentiator of B Corp, right? We're coming to the tricky questions. Very often, moving towards an impact business model for a company involves saying no to something that maybe the company was doing before or that most of its competitors are doing. Like, for example, I'm thinking Camif in France, who was one of the first B Corp, is doing made in France furniture, focusing on made in France furniture, and they, over time, have refused import from Asia, for example, which is 95% of the market on furniture. And now recently they've stopped importing from Asia. So they've gone up the made in France part of their business from, I think, 45% 8 years ago to 70 or 80. The rest is now coming from Europe. They've stopped Asian imports. So, and you know, some people working on sustainable business also draw inspiration from permaculture, where in permaculture you need to set limits. And probably set boundaries, probably maybe to better take into consideration the planetary boundaries. So set boundaries for the business, which of course is in conflict with the idea of unlimited growth, maybe of the business. What do you think of this? Is this relevant to impact business models? How could they, over time, maybe better integrate the concept of giving up some activities, closing some activities, maybe choosing prosperity rather than absolute growth, or maybe you mentioned additionality versus taking market shares on to less responsible competitors?
Yeah, that's
a tricky one.
Again, a really good question. Yeah, and I think it also goes back to what we were talking about business models being extraordinary, right? Like the fact that there might be really tough, difficult decisions that are, again, outside of the norm of whatever industry that you're facing is pretty core to what we mean by having an impact business model. And so I think in the spirit of what you're sharing, absolutely that makes sense with impact business models. I would say some of the other ideas that you're referring to, like making sure businesses are operating within planetary boundaries and things like that, I think is not only relevant for how we think about impact business models, but is ultimately something that, whether you've designed your business to do something or not, all businesses need to be transitioning towards working within those planetary boundaries.
Good. There's a key aspect of business models in general, and it's obviously true for impact business models as well, which is their ability not only to deliver impact, but to provide a competitive advantage to the company, meaning to be a business model that's sustainable, not in the ecological sense, but in the business financial sense. How do you capture that? Is that the mission of B Corp or the B Impact Assessment to capture that, or is that left to companies?
Yeah, it's that question actually makes me think back to your question about what advice I would offer.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first other pieces of advice that I should have offered is don't adopt an impact business model that's going to put you out of business. There obviously are important considerations around what is the financial sustainability of an organization. As they say, no margin or no money, no mission, right? And there's probably a real risk in that. And that's because, as we've been talking about, the difficulty of impact business models means that ultimately sometimes there are trade-offs to a company's financial performance as a result of that. I would say, first of all, my role as a standards person is to think about the impact of impact business models. And so it's not my responsibility.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe a last question, talking about trends. What do you see like companies doing? Are there specific IBM's impact business models where companies are making more progress over time, that some companies are getting better? Are companies getting better who improve their score? Are they getting better on the operational aspects or on the IBM's aspects?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And so I don't have data points available to give something direct. So I'll share like what I think would be my anecdotal perspective. On the whole, we see that companies over time improve their performance collectively, which is actually a really, really great thing. That's sort of inherent to what we're trying to achieve. And so it's really good that it actually plays out that way. The way that plays out, I think, is going to vary pretty significantly by company. That being said, despite the fact that where we were talking about at the beginning, impact business models being rare, extraordinary, lasting, difficult in all of these ways, I would say personally the number of companies that we've seen adopt impact business models over time has been actually a pleasant surprise. And so there's sometimes a presumption of an impact business model is something that you had to be born with, right? It's you had it from the start.
Because it's design.
Because it's about design, that's right. But design can change. We talk about it takes time, but it can change. And we do frequently see that. And particularly when we also think about those other principles, whether it be verifiability and things like that, I think you could actually latch on to individual aspects of those principles of what it means to be an impact business model that kind of explains how companies are creating that improvement. A company might be really close to an impact business model, but they might struggle to verify it. And so based off of their experience going through the assessment process, they learn, oh wow, I might have this design, but I can't prove it. I need to create more systems to think about how I actually structure my business to then achieve it. And then when they come around the next time, they're able to demonstrate that. They've got the data, they've got the proof, they're measuring their outcomes. And all of that is, I think, maybe a little bit more measurement focused, but measurement's really powerful and really important. And so it actually helps drive that forward.